Welcome to Bonafide Dialogues.
Thanks for having me.
In a world that's always racing forward, sometimes we need to slow down and reconnect.
Connect genuinely, broaden your perspective, and share your passion.
Bonafide Dialogues, where authenticity, creativity, and passion merge.
Wonderful. Today I would like to talk about privacy by design and privacy by default. The concept of privacy by design has been around for decades, but it's still not widely implemented. I would like to ask you, first of all, to tell us about privacy by design and then maybe about regulations here in the United States and in Europe.
Yeah, so privacy by design has been a long-standing concept in privacy, long before laws started requiring it. In the early days, Anne Cavoukian, who was a privacy official in Canada, came up with a set of privacy by design principles and the term and really popularized it very heavily. And it really took off as a practice that companies started doing and trying to do. And then the next kind of step in that process was the EU in the GDPR included a provision that required that companies engage in privacy by design and that they consider privacy early on in the design process of their products. And they also had a provision saying that, if there are different default options, the default option should be privacy by default. They call it data protection over there. So they said data protection by default. If you have a different choices, the default choice should be the most privacy protective choice, the least exposure, and so on. And those are the two rules that they established. So it's kind of known as data protection by design and default. Some US laws started to kind of give a nod to privacy by design, but in a very, I guess, superficial way. And I think even the GDPR's treatment of this is rather superficial. Uh, I think that, it's very easy just to say, design for privacy. And it sounds really pretty, it sounds really nice, but you actually have to regulate this with a lot more rigor. Because anyone can say, yeah, we're designing for privacy. Sure, of course, we care about privacy. Of course, we'll talk about privacy. Uh, we'll get into like what does that mean? Because uh, a design for privacy is only as good as what the blueprint is. And most of the time, the blueprint actually is really shallow and bad and incomplete. Um, Privacy by default. It's a good idea. I like that. It hasn't spread as much to the US. I don't see many laws in the United States that adopt it. I actually can't think of any. But uh, how rigorously are you going to enforce that? How much are regulators going to really demand that this be done? And when it comes to privacy by design, how do you actually implement or a meaningful enforcement of that to get companies to do it? Because it's just an easy thing to say, yeah, of course we did it, but that doesn't mean it's done well, or even done at all, unless there's regulators that will back it up by saying like, okay, this isn't good enough, or we're going to check to see did you do it. Uh, but just saying like, go ahead, please do this it's not really strong enough. And that's kind of where the law is right now. I think that in a lot of contexts, and we can get into some, there's one context where the law actually starts to put a little bit of rigor on it. But most of the time, in most design issues, the law does not put much rigor, and as a result, it's a really hollow, nice sounding provision, but doesn't actually do anything.
I agree. It's a good concept, privacy by design, but in real world, most products are being designed by startups. And the last thing startups are thinking about is privacy. They're thinking we need to build this product fast before we run out of money, of our funds. We want to hire engineers, we want to hire sales. We don't need compliance, we don't need legal. Somebody who would be there and tell them this is how you build it in. I would like our startups to actually change their approach and think about, even on consulting basis, involved legal, involved compliance professionals to guide you to create that framework within your company from the very, very beginning. Because if you build in privacy from the very beginning, then you will see good results. But what normally happens, the product is being designed by a startup without thinking about privacy, and then it's acquired by a bigger company, and they're trying to build on top of it. But it's much harder to integrate your privacy principles and functions later on, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. Privacy from the beginning is key. Retrofitting for privacy often does not work very well, and it leads to a lot of bad consequences, such as generally a lot of these startups grow up with a culture of an ethos of not really caring about privacy, not being responsible, not being careful, not thinking about the impact of the technologies on society. And then when they get big, they have to somehow retrofit for that. But it's very hard to kind of change the culture and really turn around that dramatically. And that's what we see with a lot of these bigger companies. They still have the kind of tech bro ethos of let's just go in and make a lot of money and destroy the world and who cares and because they've got nothing to lose. And this is a really big problem generally, and it's a problem I'm trying to explore in a paper I'm writing right now on enforcement. And the problem is that when you have the startup companies, and even with larger companies with AI today, the problem is the incentives are so crazily skewed toward risk taking, that it just doesn't make any rational sense for them to care about following the law. And so if you're a startup, you really are worried. You're in a constant existential battle, especially with tech companies. It's an existential battle. You're in this race and you're developing something. And if you do not show tremendous growth and progress, the money will dry up. And if the money dries up, you're dead, you're gone, you're out of business. And so they're really worried about, okay, we have to survive for our next funding and our next funding. They know that the regulators are not going to come knocking anytime soon when they're small. They typically don't come in till the company is about to go public or has gone public or has gotten really big, like an Amazon or a Microsoft or Meta. They come in then. But at that point, they're already established and they have something to lose. But early on, they don't have anything to lose, except they just don't want to die. And so if I'm a CEO of these companies, and I'm thinking, okay, I can slow down and try to think about privacy and mull this over and build it in and maybe be a little bit more restrained, or I'm going to just go as fast as I can, break as much as I can, do whatever. And then I know, if eventually, if I'm lucky enough to live to a point where I'm big, then I know the regulators are going to knock on my door and say, "What's going on? You don't care about privacy. You're not doing anything." And I'll just say, "I'm so sorry. Oh, forgive me. I didn't know any better. Oh, please educate me. I'm so eager. I'm going to hire a privacy team and I'll build a privacy program. I'll be good from now on." And they will try to reform, but that's the problem, because they know it's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. And that's the incentives. And I think there's a little bit of a denial in the regulatory community and just generally among policymakers about this fact. They keep thinking that companies somehow will behave in ways that, are kind of defy the laws of economics, defy the rules, the laws of incentives, and that ultimately that they will somehow be these like moral beings with a conscience. And corporations don't have morality. They don't have a conscience. There are some people in a company that have a conscience, but companies are structured to make a profit. They are designed and their incentives are survive and grow and make money. That's what they do. They respond very well to incentives. Uh, they are machines designed for that. But they do not feel, they do not love, they do not weigh morality. They are not that, no matter what they say, that's not what they are or do. And we have history to bear this out. Companies will do, they act as they act. But the big mistake that I think policymakers make is they forget about that and think, oh, the companies are just going to do the right thing. Oh, can't believe that they're acting like a psychopath. Well, that's how they're structured. They're not structured to have morality. They're not incentivized to have morality. So don't be surprised when they do something that's immoral or that's bad, because that's what they're built to do. Just like, no one would be shocked. A shark is not going to suddenly say, you know what, eating seals is really bad. Poor seals. I have a conscience. I'm going to starve and not eat my seals. No, it's just the world doesn't work that way. And I think if we recognize that the world works this way, companies are, I think, amoral. They're not immoral. They just do what they're structured to do. Uh, it's on the law and on policymakers to rein them in and to make sure that they behave. And if they don't do it, they won't behave. I think it's that simple. But time and again, it's just like let them run loose, let them do whatever, and that somehow that's going to be good.
If we talk about large companies, I think there are great ethics and compliance departments in many companies, not all. Many brilliant people doing amazing job educating
They're moral.
employees and working with and privacy professionals. But again, they're not the ones who are making final decisions.
Exactly.
Right?
They're people living in the shark's belly. And they can whisper to the shark, "Hey, go easy on the seals." And you know what? There are times when the shark will listen. If there's a business case for it, they'll listen. They will restrain themselves when they have something to lose. When they get big, they'll listen. It's harder when they're small and they're, first just worried about survival. When someone's worried about existential survival, it's really hard to get them to start thinking about restraint and responsibility. I think AI really messes everything up in certain ways because it even for the big companies, it's existential. I think a lot of the big companies think, if we don't develop our AI, and this is why they're kind of pushing their AI on everybody, like everybody has AI. It's like, it can't open up a document with like, hey, user AI. I open up the web, user AI, AI, and they're throwing it in my face. I feel like just constantly thrusting it in to my face, and it's getting annoying. But they're in a race. If they feel like if they lose the race, they could be the next like AOL, the next Yahoo. We see all the tombstones of the early internet companies, and they're afraid that they're gonna die. And when you're in a life and death struggle, uh, the other stuff goes by the wayside. The people whispering in your ear, like, "Hey, have a conscience. Hey, be responsible." They disappear. And it's one thing if you're comfortable and you're not in this existential situation, or if a company is already well established and is not really worried about it, or the stakes aren't that high. Yeah, it's easy to say, "Hey, we'll be restrained." I think that's great when so I think that the internal people do a great job. They do convince companies to not do a lot of things. I mean, if you look at the things that it's hard to really see their work because a lot of their work are the things that companies decide not to do, the technologies they decide to pull up on and hold up on. Uh, so I do think they're doing great work, but at the end of the day, I think it just comes down to the basic reality. And the equation is this, and it works just like the law of gravity. When the stakes are really high, the higher the stakes, the more likely that a company is to kind of throw caution to the wind and ignore the privacy officer. The privacy officer can be telling them to do the right thing, the team's doing all the right thing, and then the company has like this major scandal, like a Cambridge Analytica. I mean, always like, I don't understand. Like, they have good privacy people, they have a good privacy program, they have something like 1,000 people on privacy. Like, how could this happen? And the reason it happens is because in certain areas, the company has decided that this is really important. And when they decide it's really important to roll out the technology, or they really want to go fast, like AI, privacy kind of doesn't matter as much. And that's the reality. It's not that like every single thing that a company does is going to be consistently, respecting privacy at a level. You have companies can be really good with privacy, but then when they're really hungry, you know, it goes by the wayside. It's kind of like Lord of the Flies, right? They're stuck on an island and they're trying to survive, the worst instincts come out. But if they're just sitting in normal, it's calm and civilized, they'll be much better behaved. But
But
this,
even in normal situations, it seems like privacy by design is not always being implemented. And I wanted to highlight the fact that privacy professionals, compliance professionals need to be more proactive. You have to build relationships with product, with design, not just then they come to you for approval, but you are there. Even if you can be very, very busy, you are there. You know what they're trying to build. You know what another tool they're trying to implement. You need to be there. This is how you design it. You have to be there. You have to guide them. They have to come to you because you're their ally, not
yeah,
to come to you for approval, but working together, I think is extremely important.
Yeah, I definitely think, the privacy officer, a good privacy officer can kind of has to be an ambassador and has to really get to know, the various departments in a company from marketing to engineering. They've got to understand what they do, work with them, gain their trust, and try to get involved early on. And, if they're successful, they can have a lot of impact because a lot of times, the engineers really do want to do the right thing.
Absolutely.
They do want to do it. They are not, they're not the upper management that's sweating the next funding round. They are just trying to build something and they need to, think about the issues and need help thinking about them. And that's what the privacy officers are really good at doing, is helping them think through the issues. And so I definitely think that, that's part of the role of the privacy officer. It is, something that is great when the privacy officer tries to do it. It helps a lot when you have upper management set the right tone and the right culture. So, if the top basically doesn't care about privacy and really, says, yeah, we have the privacy team, but we really don't pay attention to them. They're just kind of annoying naggers who say no all
Yeah,
the
it's
time.
like police officer in the company, right? Are you doing the right thing? No, this is not the kind of relationship you want to have in your company. You want them to come to you, and because most people, like you said, including designers, they want to do the right thing. I think the main issue here, when you try to build in privacy by design, there's always going to be feedback, there's always going to be pushback based on customer retention, because every time you build in some requirement, they're losing customers. They're always looking at the data and seeing people drop off here, people dropped off there because they had to go through all these extra loops, extra steps. We're losing customers. So from the legal point of view, because there's so many regulations, and if you push every single one and try to implement everything, if it's highly regulated area, then the product won't sell. So there should be some balance, so you can show that you respect your customers, you respect their privacy, you build those boundaries, but at the same time, you want to have a user-friendly product, user-friendly interface, not where we download the app, for example, and before you get to what you want, you have to go through 20 approvals, accept this, accept that, go to those settings. I don't want to do it anymore. So there's always a balance that is challenging, but teams need to work together to make it work and also do it the right way, right?
Yeah, well, I think privacy laws have a kind of original sin, and I think they've gone in the wrong direction. This has been a theme in my work for a very long time, and it's going to be the subject of a book I'm eventually going to write in the next few years. But I've been working on this for 10 years, and more than 10 years actually. And that is, I think privacy laws kind of taken the wrong direction. And the way that they've approached it is they've put way too much onus on individuals and trying to rely on that somehow individuals are going to be able to, if just given like a lot of information and a lot of choices, they're just going to somehow make all the right choices, and that's fine. Hey, you can opt out, so give you a big notice, give you all these rights like right to delete, right to access, right to correct. That somehow that will be
Read
good.
our policy, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't work. I mean, the problem is like none of this really works very well. And that is, I think, the biggest problem in that, and so the things that happen on the websites that are supposedly protecting people's privacy really don't, and they're more annoyances for people. So, I don't know anyone who said like, "Ooh, I love those cookie banners that pop up." Asking me if I want the cookies. I don't think anyone has said like, "Oh my gosh, this is so wonderful. I love it. I'd love to have every site pop me up with a cookie banner when I visit it. Oh, I love to check out like the 30 different kinds of cookies I can toggle on and off. I just love it." Nobody that I know likes it. There's a lot of things like this that, ultimately, the big notices on the sites. No one reads these notices. Um, uh, they don't. Studies show like less than 1% read it. So they're meaningless, and so you don't really have people meaningfully consenting to anything, and people really can't make these decisions. I mean, I for 25 more years, and I don't know enough reading a privacy notice to make these decisions. And the reason is, if I'm asked to, okay, should I share my data? I have no idea what the future uses could be. I have no idea what I'm actually revealing about myself because algorithms can make inferences from the data that, I could say, okay, I'm just going to, people, there's a big anecdote with Target. More than 10 years ago, Target decides they want to figure out who's pregnant before they start buying baby products so they can start marketing to them. And so they start with the algorithm of figuring out shopping patterns and are able to identify people who are pregnant. And in this New York Times story, this father comes into Target and complains, like, I have a teenage daughter and I don't understand why we're getting all these baby ads. It turns out she was pregnant and she hadn't told him yet.
Yeah.
Algorithm figured it out based on buying cotton balls and unscented products. And the fact is that, here we now have sensitive health data inferred from rather innocuous purchases. So if someone asks, hey, do you care if someone knows the soap that you buy? I would say, I don't care. Do you care if someone knows that you bought cotton balls? No, that's not that sensitive. But now suddenly someone can figure out my health and take this, and you can see how this works for all sorts of things. The data we give out I'm not an expert computer scientist. I don't have access to these algorithms. I don't know what algorithms are going to come out tomorrow or how they're going to analyze my data or all the different combinations of the data that are going to be combined and what they can infer from me. It could be almost anything. And so I can't manage it. I can't determine, based on if they ask me, hey, do you want to share that you've bought these things? Don't worry, it seems innocuous that it might not be. So that's the biggest problem we face. I don't think a consumer can really uh, figure these decisions out and make these decisions because it's just too complicated. And so I think we have to rethink privacy laws. People don't want the burden of having to go through all these steps. A lot of it is theater. It's not really protecting them. It's trying to make it look like there's something there and that their privacy is, and they ignore it. Uh, but what happens is down the road, something bad happens. Information about them is known and used in ways that they don't want it to be known or don't want it to be used. People can be harmed. And but then the companies say, hey, we gave you the right. You could have deleted your account or you didn't have to share it with us. 10 years ago, when you signed up, you said okay.
Yeah.
Um, so that's just not a good way to protect privacy. That's how the laws are doing it. So they're not really, I think we need to a big rethink in what it means to protect privacy, what it means to design for privacy. Because I think that if you actually go and you ask companies, okay, you're designing for privacy, because they'll say, oh, yeah, of course we design for privacy. What does that mean?
What exactly do you do, right?
And there was a professor who did this, actually. Ari Waldman wrote a book called Industry Unbound. And it's a really interesting book because what he did was he actually went to the companies and he talked to the privacy officers, he talked to the engineers, and he asked them, okay, you're doing designing for privacy. Well, what does that mean? What do you look for? How are you designing? What privacy are you building in? And what they said was pretty disheartening. Their conception of privacy was, well, we have access controls and encryption. That's it. It was a very narrow, simplistic, incomplete understanding of privacy. And so, well, then so in a way, if you're like building something, you need a good blueprint for it. It's just like, okay, I'm going to make a pizza. I need a recipe. And if I say, yeah, I'm baking a pizza, and I forget the sauce, I forget the cheese, I forget the pepperoni. I just made a loaf of bread. Haven't really made a pizza. So, someone needs to there needs to be rigor about what it means. Just saying design for privacy, it's like saying like, okay, go and make a pizza. And then it's like, I made a pizza. Uh, that's not meaningful regulation. That's not meaningful protection. That is just a joke. You need to
Yeah,
say,
seems like
okay,
many of them don't even know what they've been asked, right? What
yeah,
do you want from us?
the
We
law
did
needs to tell them like,
it.
okay, this is what privacy you need to do. And when the law gets more specific, it gets better. So you do have certain provisions in laws that are dealing with dark patterns. And dark patterns are deceptive designs. And laws are starting to prohibit these. But here we can actually, when the law makes it clear, okay, this is what you want to not do, or it gets more specific, it's going to get better. When the law gets just too,
Yeah,
uh,
general. Yeah.
but then it could be an evolving standard. So you could say, look, design for privacy, but then the agency needs to be able to uh, say, okay, here's what we're going to look for. So when you do your assessment for what you're designing for, here's guidance on, you know, 20 different things you need to think about. That's much more helpful. And then you need accountability. So, I think you need to audit some companies to say, okay, we're going to take a look. Can we look under the hood and see, are you in fact following privacy by design? Let's
Yeah.
see. And then they can look and say, okay, here are the things that we said you should do. Have you looked at them? Are they in your in your products? Are they built in? Let's take a look. And then if they are not, you ding them. You say, hey, you did wrong. You get you're going to get punished for it. And then the companies now are on notice that they better do it. And if they otherwise, they won't. Uh, it works like other products are like that. I can't just make a car and just spit it out into the world. I can't just go, oh, I'm going to just print up a car and pop it into the on the dry and sell it. Someone's going to inspect it. They're going to make sure it's safe. I just can't just go and do that. Uh, I can't open up a restaurant and just say, I'm going to do whatever I want. I can just ignore food safety. But technology, that's kind of what they want. And that's what they expect. They say, okay, we're just going to do whatever. We can ignore whatever. We'll say we're safe, but we're not doing anything. And then, let's see what happens. Um, that's It just doesn't work well. And we've learned these lessons from other areas of regulation. I think we need to learn it for privacy, for AI safety, for technology more generally. We need to learn, like, you need someone actually taking a look thoughtfully about what to do and need guidance. The law needs to say more than just design for privacy. It needs to get more rigorous because if you don't have the rigor, you're not going to get anything.
I think people know about privacy by design, but the concept of privacy by default is not widely discussed. Could you please talk a little bit about privacy by default?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically, choosing the least privacy invasive by default. So a lot of times, there are default settings. So if you go to social media, you have certain settings by default, like how public is your information, how do you share things, and so on. What are your privacy settings? And I think the idea behind the default is that, the privacy setting should be not very, privacy invasive. So by default means like, hey, it shouldn't be set to be, posts should be public, rather should be friends only or something like that. That's just one possibility. But there's a lot of different ways in which, the default choices should be made to start out as more privacy protective.
Yeah. Would you
Because
like to share your data? It usually by default, yes. So somebody has to go through all their settings, find it, and change it so they can protect their data.
And most people don't do that. I mean, the
Most
bottom
people
line is
don't do
that
it.
no matter what, you can look at the rates, it's very low, the amount of people who actually change their settings. And another problem too is that the settings are often very hard to find and are very
Exactly.
confusing. I think a lot more work needs to be done, and this is not included in the laws, but the more work needs to be done to make sure the settings are actually easy and understandable to use. Because oh yeah, we have the settings. Go ahead and trying to figure out and find all the settings. They're in different places and they're hard to do. And it's rocket science to actually get them right. There actually were some studies from a long, long time ago about people, did they set their social media settings correctly? Uh, and the researchers asked them, okay, what are your goals? What do you want to do? And then they looked at the settings to see, in fact, did the settings match what they wanted? And I think it was like overwhelming, like 80 to 90% did not match. So we are seeing too is that people, not only are not doing their settings, but when they do them, they don't actually get the results they want because there's too much complication. So we really need to do a lot more with that. We need to do better, but we're not going to get better if the laws just say, pretty please. The laws have to have real enforcement that creates real incentives to do this. Because otherwise, the companies are just going to say, that's nice. We'll say we did it. And then, we'll wait for them to, crack the whip on us. But oftentimes, the enforcers don't like to do that in these cases. And the reason is that it's qualitative enforcement rather than easy uh, dings that you can get. And so the enforcers, they're under-resourced, they're understaffed, they don't have a lot of money, they really have to struggle to keep up. They want a quick fix, they want a quick settlement, they want to catch someone with a smoking gun. And so it's really easy to do the small things like, hey, you didn't have the cookie banner. The law says you have to get the cookies, consent, and you didn't do it, so gotcha. And so the enforcement becomes, it goes on these kind of easy, trivial things. But the really important thing, like designing for privacy, they don't want to go there because now they have to start saying, okay, your design wasn't good enough. Your defaults were not quite good enough. And it's more qualitative. And the company's going to say, well, who are you to say that? Where's the guidance? I want a clear rule. And I think that's the enforcers need to be willing to say, well, we're saying it now. And, sometimes the rules aren't always clear, but we're going to ding you. And, you can cry foul, you can whine and do whatever, but, they need to enforce qualitatively uh, rather than go after these kind of easy things, which are often less meaningful. Uh, but yeah, the enforcers don't want to do that because they know they're going to get an earful. They know if that's the case, it's like, saying, clean up your room to a kid. And the kid, and then like, what does that mean? And the kid just, okay, fine. I picked up a couple things off the rug. I threw away moldy food. My room is clean. And he's, well, no, technically it's not. You didn't dust it. You didn't do this. You didn't do that. And, oh, you didn't tell me. You didn't tell me. And I feel like the companies are kind of like those children. They'll throw a temper tantrum. They'll nitpick at everything. They'll push back. But the enforcers need to say, no, we're going to have a reasonable standard. We're going to enforce it. And we're going to have some real qualitative assessment of things, no matter how much you moan and groan. Otherwise, the law won't be meaningful. The standard won't be meaningful, and it's going to be ignored.
So then you think about privacy by default from the legal point of view. Let's just have all our settings for privacy purposes, right? From the corporation, from the company standpoint, they say, we need users to share the information so we can customize their user experience. Otherwise, they won't get this full experience they deserve, and they're not going to use our app or our product, whatever it is. So it seems like there always needs to be some balance. So we can't say, let's do privacy by default, let's do this, let's do that. It seems like there's some things that you really want to have privacy by default when, for example, when we talk about children, right? When we talk about some sensitive personal information, there shouldn't be even question, like you said, it should be the law and it needs to be enforceable.
And I think like data minimization laws do this. There's a few, not many, that say, look, the information you gather and use should be necessary for the service you're delivering. And when it's not necessary, that creates problems. And so, there are some like financial payment apps where your information, where it's public. I think a lot of people don't realize this. They go and they start, doing their transactions, and suddenly they're actually public because it's defaulted to setting it public. Now, I don't understand why that setting needs to be the case. How is it necessary to pay people to make it public? I really don't get it. Maybe there's some rationale, but they should be forced to articulate what that rationale is. And I think that that's a case where we can say, look, what's necessary? Yes, it's necessary that they have to get your financial data to make the transaction, but it's not necessary that it be public. So don't make it public by default. I think that there are some times where yes, there's information sharing that has to take place, but it doesn't. Does a flashlight need to know my location? The answer is no, it really doesn't. Does Uber need to know my location? Yes. And so there are a lot of instances where we really can make a good judgment as to what is, in fact, really related and necessary to a service, or at least very important to it, and what is not. And I think it's a with a lot of things in life, there are things that are easy judgment calls and harder, grayer areas. There are some things that are pretty black and white where there's pretty good consensus. And I think most people, can kind of look at a lot of the use cases and a lot of these things and say, look, there's a lot of times where, come on. Um, there's other times where it might be grayer. But oftentimes the obsessiveness on, oh, well, there's some gray areas, so we just can't draw a line. And I know, in fact, why don't we just say, look, if it's clear, that's one thing. If it's not, an agency will decide, where it's a little less clear. But a lot of cases are clear. And that's how the law works generally. If you look at how the law works for, let's say, auto accidents, right? We have a standard of negligence. It's reasonable care. A lot of cases are open and shut. They're so open and shut, they just settle out of court. You don't see them go to trial. There are some where it's kind of a tough call. It's tough. It's hard to figure out, like, okay, who was at fault here? The law figures it out and makes a judgment, and that's that. And I think, that's what we need to do here but we can't just say, oh, because some accidents are really hard to sort it out that we just can't have a law of negligence and it's all okay or it's all not okay. I think we have to realize, like, you know, a lot of cases are easy cases. There are going to be some hard cases. We'll figure out the hard cases, but that shouldn't stop us from also just dispatching with a lot of these easy ones. And so I think, like, in a lot of cases, it's pretty clear, pretty obvious that, these settings don't need to be this way. Data doesn't need to be collected. It doesn't, it's just something the company's doing because it wants to do it, or it's modeled to monetize it. I think then the default should be different. And there should be real thought about, okay, what is the model? And it's just a fair model. I think it's certainly fair for companies to be able to monetize what they're doing, monetize their products, have ads and so on. But there's also, a set of harms and a set of issues that you need to navigate. There's a lot of ways that, I'd like to monetize things that I do, but that would be harmful to people. And, we need to say, okay, some are okay, but other ones are not okay. And then there's some that are in the gray area where they're sometimes okay and they're sometimes not okay. It's, sometimes it's okay for you to gather some data, just be careful how you use it. Don't harm people, or, don't be, don't, so sort of gobble up all the data that you gather without a real need for it. If you don't have it, you need to think about these things. And that's what the people inside the company do. The privacy officers think about it. That's what they're trained to do. But unless the law says or puts some weight behind what they do, they won't get the respect and power they need in the company to do their jobs well. So that's why you need the law behind them, so they can go to the CEO and say, we need to be careful here. We need to do this. I need to work with these teams. They can, liaise with the teams all they want, but ultimately they need to be able to say, if we don't do this, we're going to get in trouble. The regulators are out on the prowl.
That's what they usually ask. Is it something that is required, or it's nice to have? So it's good if the privacy officer can say it's required.
Exactly. The stricter the penalties and the more likely the enforcement, especially likelihood of enforcement. That's one of the most, it's almost more important than the penalties.
I mean, the CEOs and who's in charge, that's the question they would usually ask. Is that something that's required by law, or it's something that you're just recommending? Is it nice to have? So what are we talking about?
They need to be required by law, and they need to know that if they don't do it, there's a good chance that they're going to get in trouble. And ideally, if they get in trouble, there's going to be a serious penalty. That's what makes them wake up and say, okay, you go and do it. And you know what? When you do, talk to the engineers, they will know that it's a priority of this company to listen. That, don't ignore the privacy officers. Go to the privacy office. We want you to go. And if you don't talk to them and you have a product, you're going to get in trouble, because we really care about privacy. And this is going to be something that we are going to instill in the company, a culture of caring about it. And so talk to the privacy officer, work with the privacy team. And if you don't, that is a bad thing.
Going back to the general principles, most important principles, reasonable expectation of privacy. What do we believe in? Do
Well,
we care about our customers? Do we care about their privacy?
Well, I think they don't a lot of times at the upper level. I mean, that's what they don't even know what privacy is. Uh, you know, uh, the fact that, being head of a company doesn't mean that you're a good person or that you're a thoughtful person or that it just means that you started a company and you like to take risks.
I'm thinking about startups. We started talking about startups, and it may sound that they just do whatever they want, but I think it's very important to build the culture of ethical behavior and respecting your customers from the very beginning.
I
And
agree.
I think we discussed the fact that they're building fast. They don't think about privacy, compliance, and other important issues. They just want to sell their company, they want to exit. And how do we actually help them to do the right thing? And I think the role of investors, VCs, can be identified in this situation because they're investing into this company, so they want the product be good for the customers and good for the world, right?
I'm not sure I agree with what the venture folks want. I think they just want the company to make a lot of money. They're investing, they should be seen as like gamblers in a casino. And, obviously if they know that like if the company does have a privacy violation, it would really hurt the company like in a big, big way, then they would care. But I think that that's not what happened.
Now, I wish it was the case in a perfect world, right?
Yeah.
I
Well,
want
yeah,
to have
it could
VCs, they
be.
already have so much money. They need to think about the world, right?
They
What do
should,
we
but
want
then
this world to
take the
look
incentive.
like? Can you do something good to make a difference in the world, right? I believe in this team of people. They have amazing idea. This idea will solve this specific problem. Let's do it the right way. If you guys don't do it the right way, we're not going to invest in you. I think if you do it, if you make it clear and you have this young, inspired people, working on the product, if they hear that, that is something they would take into consideration and maybe have somebody to, consultant to help them to create those frameworks and rules and policies around the product to begin with. Because today we're talking about privacy by design, and because so many products are built by startups and privacy by design is not implemented from the very beginning. That's why I'm kind of thinking, what can we do? Maybe put some of that burden on VCs. But I hear you. I
They're
understand.
not, the VCs are not. I think ultimately it's on policymakers. I ultimately blame policymakers. I don't think these startups are acting irrationally. I think they're acting exactly as we've incentivized them to act. The VCs are incentivized to do what the VCs do. And it's up to society to say, this is what we want, this is what we're going to stand for, and this is what we're not going to stand for. And if you don't, it's like the substitute teacher in the classroom. If they don't get control of the class and make it very clear what the standard is and that people should behave, they're not going to behave. And the students are going to go be unruly. And it's the job of the policymakers to say and hold them to account. The VCs are not going to sort of just voluntarily out of the goodness of their own heart decide, okay, we're gonna forgo a profit and just do the right thing. I mean, we want that to happen. It'd be great if the world worked that way. It doesn't work that way. So I think that, it's up to policymakers to make the world work that way. That's why we have law. That's why people don't go around, we have laws to say, hey, you can't just go around killing anybody. You have to drive carefully. You have to act properly. You have to behave yourself in society. And and the law has to create the right incentives for people to do it. The law creates the wrong incentives, doesn't work. If it creates
Yeah.
the right incentives, it does. And the law's gotten it right in certain industries. It's improved. It learned like, hey, if you really want to make safer cars, just saying please be safe doesn't work. The way to make safer cars is you have car safety regulation. And once we got good car safety regulation, the car says, "Oh no, we can't do it. We can't do it." Guess what? Guess we got seatbelts, we got airbags, we have safer cars. And we say, "Hey, we can't make a fuel efficient car." Now you can. Guess what? The law incentivizes it. The companies do it. Create the right incentives, you get the right outcome. It's sort of this quote by Charlie Munger I like. It's show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. And that's what we need to do. And if the law does it, we'll get what we want. If the law doesn't do it, we can keep hoping that somehow maybe the VCs will be nice, maybe the founders will be nice, maybe everything will be good. But
So you don't believe in this shared responsibility. So startup founders and the teams, VCs, then us customers, right? If you know that this company doesn't respect privacy, then let's don't use it. Let's don't buy it. I have this belief into this shared responsibility, but I certainly hear you.
it's tough because a lot of times, consumers don't have much of a choice and don't know enough to know even if they're doing a good job on privacy because but they don't even know when they're going to get bit by it. It's often too late. So they don't know enough to analyze it. That's why we have, just like I don't know enough, when I make the analogy of buying milk in the super. I want to go to the supermarket. I don't want to have to research the farms my milk came from. I don't have to be an expert on milk production or pasteurization. I just want to pick up my milk and buy it. Has my back and has figured all these things out and has researched it and understands, and checking to make sure the milk is safe, it's pasteurized, and it's going to be okay. And I don't have to think about it. I want to go on my plane. And you know what? I don't want to have to think about, okay, let me research the pilot and let me learn how to fly the plane. And let me learn about plane mechanics. And is the plane built? Do I have to inspect my own plane every time I go on it? No.
But if you know there's some accidents on this specific airline, you're not gonna buy tickets again, right? So it still works kind of
Maybe
together.
we don't have choices as much anymore with consumers. And that's the other problem. The law has been very bad about enforcing sufficient consumer choice. So we have a lot of consolidation in the industries. There's a lot of times where, people really don't have that many options. And we have companies that are almost monopolies. If I want to use a word processing program or software, it's pretty much going to be Microsoft. You want to do search. There's not a lot of choices uh, in a lot of instances, and that's So a lot of times to fly, I don't have a choice. It's going to be one airline, and that's it. Or the other choices are going to be so ridiculously expensive or have these other trade-offs that I'm not going to want to do it. So I think we have to make sure that, it's more than choice that, we say, look, you've got to put safe, responsible products on the market and we're going to demand it. Imagine if I'm like, I'm going to do a startup car company and I'll just ignore all the safety laws and my cars just randomly blow up on people on the road. And we'd say, whoa, that's not good. We generally don't like allow that, right? No matter how small or startup I am, we say no. If you want to do this, you've got to start from the beginning and do it right. The law, it doesn't happen. It happens because the law demands it. We look
Absolutely.
at the
Yeah.
Industrial Revolution. The early companies were like, hey, we're just going to build railroads. We don't care about safety. We're going to build factories. We don't care about safety. The reason why they became safe wasn't because suddenly, like, everyone grew a conscience. It was because the law said we're going to have safe factories and we're going to have less pollution and we're going to have railroads that are safe. And it it worked. It didn't stop innovation. We're not back in the Stone Age now because of all the regulation on the Industrial Revolution. Uh, we might be in the Stone Age because we didn't have enough regulation and climate change is going to wreck the world, but that's another story. But it's I think that that's the big lesson I want to impart in my work is, regulation is not the enemy. It's we have to hold real accountability and meaningful accountability, and that you know uh, otherwise we know historically companies are going to behave this way. It's going to be this way. It's not because they're immoral, it's because they're amoral, and they just they respond to incentives and they do what they do. And we it's not just the tech industry, it's all industries. The reason why the tech industry is doing all this right now is because we're letting them get away with it, and we don't let the other industries do this. Uh, we've forgotten the lessons that we've learned with cars and with factories and with airplanes and with food and with everything else. Like, why can't we do the same for tech? Uh, in every case, they all said the same thing. Don't regulate us. It's going to be fine. We'll do it okay. We're only responding to what market wants, or we just can't do it. You'll stifle innovation. The same set of arguments again and again and again. I'm actually going to write a paper on this because I feel like, wow, it's like a broken record. You can go back and you can see the exact same things happen again and again. Um, can't we learn from what happened? And they're just rolling out the same arguments, the same playbook. It's the same old story.
Things are getting more and more complicated now with AI, right? And not just AI, agentic AI.
We're going to try to meaningfully make, the companies more responsible for what they're doing. And that does mean that, there are going to have to be instances where companies really get a big hit. Unfortunately, I think that what I see going on in the law is unfortunate in that now there's this big push for deregulation. There's a big push. Well, there's not enough innovation in the EU. So the way to bring it is let's just weaken the GDPR, weaken the AI Act, have very minimal regulation, and that's going to somehow make all the AI just like flow up from the ground. It'll just magically appear. And I think it's magical thinking that I think we're seeing there. It's not why, the big companies are here in the United States or in China or elsewhere. There's a lot of other reasons which they're ignoring, going after regulation, which is not the culprit. That, you know, but I just think that we need to just realize, like, that's the wrong direction. It's not going to get us to
Win the AI race, right? Deregulation. So you against deregulation, and you
exactly.
think that we can win this AI race without deregulation?
I think we can, well, I think yes, because I think the AI race is one based on, um, you know, law can steer technology in the right direction. So, cars, right? In fact, safe cars that are fuel efficient, they sell. It's actually good for the market. Now that maybe the industry didn't like it, actually, early on. It's interesting that the car industry kept saying people don't want safer cars. The market won't support it. Don't make force us to have safe cars because people don't want car safety. There actually someone tried a pilot project at one of the car manufacturers to say, what if we put seatbelts in the cars? Will people buy them? And really market car safety as part of the market. And it worked. They were selling. And the other car manufacturers got together with that manufacturer and said, cut that program, stop it, because it's hurting us. And they all agreed, cut the program, they stopped it. Then the law had to step in. And
I I truly believe that privacy by design, safety by design, ethics, AI ethics by design, that is something that will make your company stand out You need to be proud of those practices. And
I
like
think,
you said, advertise it and use it for your advantage.
but the law needs to get involved because ultimately, the fact is that, the companies that do the right thing, that are careful, that build privacy in, that are restrained and thoughtful, they become chumps if the other companies, imagine you're at a race, and the other companies can all cheat and you play by the rules. You are a chump for following the rules and trying to be good and careful. The law needs to say no. If you don't do the right thing, you're going to be worse off. We're going to set you back. And that helps the companies that do the right thing, that are doing it, so that they don't lose a competitive advantage by doing that. That's what we need to incentivize in the law. And unfortunately, the law is just not doing that work. The regulators are too afraid. The policymakers are too afraid. Oh my goodness, they keep buying into this myth that, oh, if we regulate, it's going to hurt innovation. So we shouldn't do it. So then you just get, irresponsible innovation. You get, rather than innovation to do good things, you get innovation to do bad things because the law isn't saying what they should be doing. If the law says, make AI that is safe, non-privacy invasive, that doesn't tell people to commit suicide, and if it sets the incentive saying, like, if you do that, you're a winner, and we're going to reward you. If you don't do it, we're going to punish you like there's no tomorrow. You're going to be hurting. You're going to feel the pain. The companies will respond. They're good at that. And I think it's interesting. Every time, we've demanded something like, safer cars, we get safer cars. We want more fuel efficient cars, we get more fuel efficient cars. It works.
So
If
now we want safe AI, responsible AI, ethical AI, and the AI that respects your privacy.
we can have that because, hey, guess what? I made this cartoon about companies innovating. On one side, they'll often say, look, we can solve any problem. We can do everything. That's what they're doing right now, right? If you ask them, can you ask the tech companies this, can you create technology and AI that will solve my problem? I mean, of course, I didn't have to tell them what my problem is, right? Their AI solves every problem, right? No matter what you do. Hey, you want to do it? I'll do this. I'll solve this. I'll do whatever. I want to do whatever you want. Um, uh, their AI is a solution to everything, right? But then you say, hey, can you build AI that's safer, that's less privacy? Oh no, my gosh, no, we can't. Oh my gosh, these regulations. Oh my gosh, they're stifling. We can't do it. Um, what happened to the can-do innovation? It's just like they want to innovate in certain ways, but they don't want to innovate, but to do other things. But making safer a seatbelt is just as innovative as a faster car, a safer car. Safety technology is also innovation. But the law needs to say and demand that if you create that, if you innovate that, you will get ahead, and the others that don't will be behind.
Yeah.
And guess what? You will have a race to do it. The companies will do that, but the incentives have to be right. And right now, the incentives aren't right. The VCs aren't demanding it. They just, no one's demanding it. And so you're not getting it. And it's that simple. If the law demands it, the companies will actually figure it out. Um, that's what innovation's about, right? It's solving problems, and the law needs to say, these are the things that we want you to do. This is what matters to society. We want safe. We want privacy protective, and we're going to, put our finger on, and we're going to jump in here and we're going to set the right incentives. I think it'll happen because it's happened with everything else. It'll happen here, but you're never going to get it unless that happens. Unfortunately, I think policymakers seem to be learning the wrong lesson. They seem to be thinking, no, let's go the opposite way. Let's not do this. Let's ease it up so that somehow magically we're going to have like more AI here. Um, I'm not sure. Do you really want that? Do you really want these things? At the end of the day, are they really good? You look at all these data centers that are going up, and they're absolutely hideous. They are an environmental nightmare. They are sucking out the electricity and raising everyone's bills, and the expenses are being sloughed onto people. The AI is a lot of it's just creating slop or taking people's jobs or resulting in, shoddy things. There's a lot of great things that AI can do, but it's often not doing those things. Instead of helping people, it's actually like taking their jobs away and not helping people. And it's not leading to make the world a better place. I think there are a lot of ways that AI could make the world a better place, but that's not how it's being developed right now. Despite what they say, it's not being developed to make the world a better place. It's being developed, it's going to take people's jobs, it's taking people's, IP off the internet, grabbing all their data, uh, doing all sorts of irresponsible things because we have the wrong incentives.
I
And we have,
think your message is very clear.
and I think that college need to learn. I feel like they're learning the wrong lessons. They're doing the wrong things, and it's heartbreaking to see it. Because every day I see and read stuff that's going on, and I think, wow, like this is not going in a good direction. Like this is not like I don't read the headlines saying, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Like AI is going to lead to this brighter future where people are happier. Instead, I see, more privacy invasion, more job loss, and a lot of bad things that are happening. But,
Seems like transition now, transitional time. Hopefully we'll get to a better place with all of
I
this.
hope so. Because I actually think AI is transformative. I think AI can really do good things. I think technology can do wonderful things. I am not anti-technology, but I do think that, right now we're using it's being used and developed in the wrong ways, um, and in almost like the worst possible ways. And I think that's the problem. And I think it could really wreck society instead of help it. And it's such a shame because we have an opportunity to use and develop technologies that could really be good for people, that could really do a lot of help. Um, we're just not doing that right now.
I have been attending some conferences lately, AI conferences, and I meet many startup founders. So I'm wondering what advice would you give them when it comes to privacy by design?
Well, I would tell them, that, I think that the best way to do this is you need to have a person who really understands what privacy is. So you need a privacy officer. This is not like do it yourself land. It's worth spending the money and doing the right thing. It's a hard message to give them when I think that the incentives the law creates are the wrong ones and that the enforcers are not really out on the beat and that, but I would say that, to the extent they can, try, you know, try to make the world a better place. At least try to hold on to that ethos as long as you can before you go to the dark side or before the venture money makes you go to the dark side or the rules of survival make you. At least try to be good. Yeah, so, that's sort of the lesson, try not to be Darth Vader.
Many people believe that they're doing good. There's not too many people in the history, bad people who thought that
Cool.
they're doing something bad.
And
So
it's scary
I
because I
think
think,
just educating themselves on privacy, and I absolutely agree with you 100%. They need to have a privacy officer as soon as they can.
yeah, I need a person who can, and I think it's also, they need to have some humility and actually have, kind of real people that they will listen to. Because I think there's when you look at a lot of the big folks that made a lot of big money in tech and some of the venture capitalists, I'm not going to name names, but you can probably imagine the cast of characters. And you hear their ideas and you hear their worldview. and the way that they see the world. It's I think deeply troubling and deeply flawed, and their visions are, I think, completely off the rails, if not totally crazy, Bond villain-esque in a lot of cases. And I think that, they need a reality check. As they get more power, as they're in this, you know, frenzied race for survival, it's easy to kind of lose your soul or to become like Darth Vader and turn to the dark side. And so I don't think they always start out that way, but I think that there's some that kind of get turned just because they don't have that awareness. They don't have people telling them, hey, wait a second, have you looked at the bigger picture? Have you taken a time to step back and see what's going on? Because there will be times where they have to make trade-offs. There will be times where it's going to be hard. There will be times where, it's very easy to say, yeah, I always do the right thing. I really care and whatever. What's tough is that there are going to be times where there are tough choices that have to be made. And I think it's just so easy for people just to kind of tell themselves good things, but then those moments happen where there really is a tough choice. And uh, and that's where people often falter. They kind of forget themselves and they kind of lose themselves. And that's where, they need to have people around them who will give them a reality check, and hopefully help them not to make those bad calls. I think that I like the show Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. I think really capture this phenomenon very, very well about how somebody, slowly through a set of choices and a set of decisions, starts out good and then turns bad because they're faced with these choices. They make one choice that leads to another bad choice that leads to another bad choice. And it doesn't happen all in like one big, dramatic moment, but a
Mm-hmm.
slow slippage. And so I think it's very important that, companies realize like this really happens and it happens a lot. And that the best way to do it is to make sure that you surround yourself with people who can be honest and tell you like, hey, take a look in the mirror, see what you're doing. Is this the right thing? So I think that would be
That's a
my
very good
advice.
message. Yeah, it's a very good message. And I think that startups usually look at legal compliance, privacy professionals. It's an expense. But then you look at the big picture, like you said, zoom out and think what can happen if you get those fines later on. It can kill your company. You can go out of business because you made one mistake, one bad decision. For a larger company, they may absorb the cost of litigation, right? But for a startup, if you make wrong decisions, you can lose your company. So I think it's very important to prioritize, at least on consulting basis, they should involve compliance, legal, privacy professionals, so they can understand the framework and get some guidance in those important on these important issues, right?
Yeah, yeah, I definitely think that, it's great for, when those stories happen. I think that, the policymakers need to do a better job of actually doing that. So they need to do a better job of, I also think like there's not enough rewards for companies that do it right. There's not enough carrots.
Mm.
And I think there needs to be a mixture of carrots and sticks that are applied, but there's not enough of them. And so, until it's there, it won't happen. Until the policymakers put like more rigor into privacy by design, it's just not going to happen well. They need to put rigor into it. And I think if they do that, and the incentives are right, we'll get what we want. Um, but they have to step up to the table to start doing that. And I just think that right now I'm disappointed in privacy laws because I think they often are nitpicking at little things like cookie banners, but they're not.
And do not address actual issues.
Yeah, the real important issues, which are, actually are design. Design is key to everything. There's a great book by Professor Woodrow Hartzog, a professor at Boston University, and he wrote a book a number of years ago, but I think it's wonderful. It's called Privacy's Blueprint. And it's all about privacy by design. It's about, some of the bad privacy by designs and some of the good designs and what to do. It's a really thoughtful book, and I think it's something that I think every privacy officer at companies should read. And ultimately, that's the thing is that the founders of these companies, they're not privacy experts. They don't know the issue. They're thinking about other things. That's why you need someone who thinks about privacy, and it's not something that you can do with like a paint by the numbers kit or some silly checklist that you download off the internet, or you can't just plunk it into ChatGPT and say, spit out, a privacy by design checklist for me. You really need someone who really has read the literature and talked to other professionals and thought
And
about
understands your business, understands your product.
And you need a person who have judgment. It takes judgment. And you can't just do this rote. You have to do this with good judgment. And that's something that, you need to invest in a person who really can do this. But the law needs to incentivize it, needs to push it, it needs to force it, because it's expensive. Hiring a privacy officer costs a lot of money. And they also need resources, and they need to have enough power to be able to do their job effectively. They need to know like the upper management has their back. So if they do go to the engineer
Absolutely.
and they say, "Hey, I want you to rework this," that the company has their back, and the company's going to say, "Do what they say," not like ignore them. So that's all that has to happen. And when it does, it can work well.
But I think it was a great discussion. I hope it was helpful to our viewers. And I want to say thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise.
Thanks so much for having me.